Third down and 20.
Starting off with the startup draft, if you guys watched our startup draft strategies video, it was basically just a rant by me on my startup strategy that I think is relatively successful. I think that receivers are undervalued in the startup draft, especially some of the higher end ones, not the tippy top ones, because I'm not usually the guy that's taking a receiver the first and second round, but rounds 3 through 7 is like, man, you can get some sick receivers. And when I was building out my rankings, like, if you're making rankings for a startup draft, some of these running backs ADPs are way higher than it really should be, right? Because I asked JT the other day, I'm like, who would you rather have, David Montgomery or Laviska Shenault? And he pretty easily said, oh, dude, Laviska Shenault. Whether or not you actually agree with that, the fact that that is a legitimate question is kind of crazy because Laviska Shenault is going like 30 picks after David Montgomery consensus most of the time. So I just think that, at least in the startup draft, receivers are super undervalued. So we can start there. Do you guys agree with me? Yes or no?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's just a lot of them. Obviously, you know, most teams nowadays play at least three wide receivers pretty consistently. So there's obviously a lot more of them than there are running backs and quarterbacks and even tight ends to an extent. So that people put a value on those other positions. While meanwhile, fantasy points are fantasy points, no matter what position they come from. So if you can get some value in rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is in a startup draft, and you could take a guy that's, you know, valued at, you know, dynasty wide receiver 15 in the third round or something like that, that's a steal. That's an absolute steal. And I think you, even if you go further down and you're, you know, taking guys that are even, you know, dynasty wide receiver 25, 30 with some upside in round 7, 8, 9, whatever it may be, like that is just something that's going to fill out your bench, give you a very deep roster, give you a lot of trade assets that you can eventually deal out and get those big time, you know, top end assets to, you know, go for a championship run here. Overall, wide receivers are some of my favorite pieces to just invest in general. And I think we'll touch on that in a few minutes when we get, you know, past the startup draft. But overall in the startup draft, I think wide receivers, just wide receiver heavy, is a very good strategy just because their value is more long-term than, let's say, a running back where, you know, they might have 3 or 4 good years, but that's typically where they top out.
I kind of have like a swing for the fence kind of mentality on the wide receivers where it's like I'm willing to go for those younger guys who have shown, you know, good stuff in their, you know, rookie sophomore years. The likes of a T. Higgins, Chase Claypool, Brandon Ayuk. I'm willing to swing for those guys early, right? And I'm willing to take them above the likes of, I don't know who's around there, like
like Stephon Diggs, right?
Or well,
Allen Robinson.
Diggs is a little different. Yeah, Allen Robinson, I'd probably
you're
be
right
taking
though, JT. Because that was actually one of my next points is that, especially in the startup draft, and this might be skewed because some of the receiver classes recently have been very good, but I mean, there's just more receivers that are always good. Is that if you have drafted young, talented receivers in that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round, you got paid and paid off really handsomely. Like I had a guy last year in one of my leagues. At the time, it was a big reach taking DK Metcalf into the 2nd round. I was like, dude, that's a little crazy. I like DK, but not that much. I mean,
It paid off.
That paid off. Like he's still around his ADP. Meanwhile, if you took Miles Sanders that late 1st, early 2nd turn, which he was going, him, Joe Mixon, there's so many running backs. You got boned a lot of the time, like boned hard because you lost 2 rounds. The position is just not as volatile, and receivers in general give you a great floor. A lot of them, they play for a minimum of like 3 to 4 good seasons, and a lot of them go for even longer, and they're still somewhat valuable when they're vets. But that's getting me into now, because we all agree receivers good to invest in the startup draft. Go young at receiver. Like JT said, shoot for the fences because of all the positions, they have a pretty high hit rate. And especially if you're able to buy into one of the dudes that had a good rookie season, the odds are still in your favor for them to go on and reach that ceiling. But now let's get into after the startup draft. Because I put out a tweet today at 3rd and 20 _ that said, youth at receiver is accurately priced and more times than not overpriced, whereas the veteran receivers are underpriced. And here kind of gets into the conundrum because CeeDee Lamb, for example, his ADP will be late second round, early third round of a startup draft right now. Meanwhile, you really wouldn't have to add a ton to trade up for Nick Chubb, let's say, who might be consensus going. I don't even know if he's going to consensus go over him now, but let's just assume, at least on my rankings, Nick Chubb is above CeeDee Lamb. Once the league is in going, right, and you're out of the startup draft, you really don't have to add a lot to turn one of these third-round picks into like an early second in a startup. Whereas in the startup draft, you would have to pay relatively handsomely to do that trade-up, which is why I think that a lot of the receivers then all of a sudden become overvalued once the league starts. Like, do you guys agree with me there? Or
Yeah, it's in a startup, it's the known versus the unknown, right? Because like if you're moving up 5 spots to go from, I don't know, let's just say CeeDee Lamb's pick 302 and Nick Chubb's like 209. That's just arbitrary. But you're giving up another, I don't know, 6th-round pick on top of that. Like that's the unknown there. That pick is the unknown. It could be anything. It's enticing. When you're out of the startup and you have your known quantities and you have what you can stack your team up against everyone else's team, and that guy's a contender, that guy's a rebuilder, that guy's going for the chip right now. All the variables are set in place other than this trade, where it's this guy has Nick Chubb, this guy has CeeDee Lamb. What we do to make it happen? So yeah, Frank, I agree. It's just you take out all of the other variables when the startup's over. Everything else is gone. There's no question marks. It's just what did it take me to go from Nick Chubb to CeeDee Lamb? Or what, vice versa.
See, what's funny too, though, is that I treat receivers as floor. I used to be a guy that I still do with my startup strategy video. Like I build my team around receivers because that's it. You will build a team. If you build a Superflex league around quarterbacks and receivers, you pick one running back like an Aaron Jones, you will have a great little core to just build around, right?
And just building off that, Frank, like if your core is a whole bunch of young wide receivers, right? Chances are that some of them are going to hit and some of them are going to, probably not hit and mediocre and around there, wide receiver 3s, flex plays, that kind of thing. But either way, the thing with young wide receivers is they're around for a long time. And for some reason, people just hold on to that value. I think the perfect example of this is like Christian Kirk. Like maybe not so much anymore that Rondell Moore. Maybe not so much now with, even like they signed AJ Green and drafted Rondell Moore and they have, Hopkins now. But before this last season, right, we had seen Christian Kirk for a full 2 seasons and he was very average, very middle of the road. But he was so, like, I'm being honest, like he was a high draft pick. He was a high draft pick that
you could still trade him.
Exactly. You could always trade young wide receivers. It's something that always holds values. Even like now, like guys like Jalen Reagor, in my opinion, right? Like he was a high end, he was a 1st-round draft pick, probably spent a good pick on him in your rookie draft, had a very average rookie season, but you turn around right now, like if you were to trade Jalen Reagor, you'd still probably get a high end 2nd-round pick. Like maybe mid at worst, but like they hold value for a very long time. So you could sell those guys in trades and actually, step up from 2 or 3, young wide receivers into a top end wide receiver. And that just makes your team that much ready for a championship and that much better, in my opinion.
Well, you could also always trade the shiny new young wide receiver. But going out of the startup, because I really want to make this point, is that wide receivers are floor. Wide receivers are not ceiling. They have inconsistent games, but you need receivers to build a core of your team. To compete, tight ends, running backs, and quarterbacks give you the competitive advantage, which I think outside of the startup draft, there are very few times that I'm going to pay top dollar to invest in a young receiver. Unless I think that dude is a stud. Like, okay, Justin Jefferson, fine. Go ahead. Like, if I think that you are basically going to be the next Julio Jones or the next DeAndre Hopkins and put up 5 seasons in a row of top 5 receiver numbers, yeah, fine. Go ahead. Pay top dollar for that receiver. But outside of that, like, a lot of the receivers are the same, which is why I actually kind of avoid going heavy for receivers outside the startup draft unless I'm getting favorable deals. On top of that, receivers like the one position that has 40 players every year that you can start and consistently have hits in the second and third round compared to every other position.
Mhm.
So why would I pay top dollar right now to go and get CeeDee Lamb, especially if I can get D-Hop for cheaper, or I can go out and get Tyler Lockett for way freaking cheaper? Like, especially if they're going to put up similar results, you lose out on the upside, but I'm not buying receivers for upside. I'm buying receivers for floor.
Well, but Frank, to build off that, you can kind of do both where it's to the point of you just traded for a OBJ from me, but OBJ is currently ranked around the likes of Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards and, you know, Corey Davis, who I kind of do like there, but he's ranked around those guys. I have so much more faith in OBJ putting up wide receiver 1 seasons. Like I would be willing to bet that OBJ puts up 2 more wide receiver 1 seasons than any of those other guys ever put up 1 wide receiver 1 season. And you could get him. You could get him for the same price. Well, but OBJ's done it before. He's proven. Obviously, he's coming off an injury. He hasn't done it on the Browns, but he's a guy that has done it. That's like such an impossible thing.
Yeah.
Think of all the wide receivers that have put up wide
If
receiver
you're going
1
to bet
numbers.
someone to put up 1,000 yards and 5
Yeah.
tutties, I'm totally taking OBJ over freaking Henry Ruggs. Are you kidding me? Even if you lose out in the ceiling of him not doing it for another 10 years. Like,
Yeah. I'd rather have 2 really good years of OBJ than 5, Lounis, mediocre years of Henry Ruggs. But it's just,
I'd agree. I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a big bet.
I think that's huge though, because you can invest in receivers and build your team around receivers, but I really don't think I was someone that did it. Every single league I do it, and I have always the best receivers in my league, but without the other pieces, you aren't going to win championships. You'll be around there, and maybe you can get lucky, but you kind of need the other dogs, which is why, like JT said, I'm not going to buy receivers at top dollar. I think that they're overrated more than underrated. Obviously, there's context. If you can go out and get Brandon Ayuk for Darnell Mooney in a late first, yeah, go do it. But I think there's a clear difference between doing that and paying 4 first-round picks for CeeDee Lamb, which is probably what it cost you right about now in peak camp hype. Like, you would need to pay just ridiculous amounts. Give me an OBJ for 2 seconds instead. Anything else on the value of receivers?
I think that touched on it pretty well, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like outside of the startup draft, I want to buy vets. In drafts, it seems like in both rookie drafts and in startup drafts, like, dude, hell yeah, I'll swing for the fences on all the receivers that you can sell me. Give me the higher hit rate. Give me the nice floor. Give me like Jake said, if they flop or if they hit, you can still sell them a year later. I mean, I just got out of my share of Michael Pittman. I still like Pittman. It's just I was able to get out the same exact price I bought him for.
Yeah.
Like somewhat similar, but like, dude, even if it's a small, like less that I sell them for, I don't know what the right terminology for is. It like, Jesus, I can't speak. You get the point though. You can buy out for what
even if you
buy
lost a little bit in the end. I think it's still worth it because like you don't believe in Michael Pittman anymore, and you got basically the same pick back a year later. So now you take another swing and you hope he hits.
And like, dude, what position can you get first rounders in the second round?
None besides
None.
besides receiver.
My question to you guys is, would you rather have Tyreek Hill or Darren Waller?
Darren Waller. Ooh.
No.
I don't know, actually. That's tough. I actually think I have Tyreek Hill rated higher on my startup list.
Yeah.
But I think they're back-to-back.
It's something very interesting to consider.
I want to say Tyreek Hill.
Well,
but
actually,
the thing with Waller, real quick,
it's such a competitive advantage to have a tight end.
That's what
makes it tough because
the difference between Waller, tight end 2, and Logan Thomas, who was tight end 3, I believe. Robert Tonyan, tight end 3, was 100 fantasy points in our league. I think it's PPR, 1 point PPR. It was 100 fantasy points. That was what separated Tyreek Hill, the number 2 wide receiver, from wide receiver 19 or 20, Chase Claypool or Terry McLaurin. That's such
Goodness,
a big
if you had
gap.
to build a team, like obviously, I think if we're a contender, we'd rather have Waller. But if you're building a team, who you own both of them, who are you
That's
taking?
what I was about to...
Building a team, start a draft,
lean-
one player to build your team around.
I lean Waller just because it's
Ooh.
like
I think-
what Jake said, that competitive advantage that he gives you at tight end over
And-
everyone else's starting to. It's the same thing with what Kelsey has done with their owners over the past few years.
Mhm.
That's why we see Pitts getting like all this hype. Because if you have that like elite tier tight end, you could say, "Oh, I had tight end 6. That's not bad, top 6." You are so far back from that like that top 3.
Just for reference, by the way, we play. Our league is a half-point PPR league with another half-point bonus for tight end premium per PPR. So tight ends get 1 point PPR, and every other position gets a half. Travis Kelce would have been wide receiver number 1 last season. Wide receiver number 1. I think Waller would have been like receiver number 3.
I'll tell you right now, Waller would have been, yes, receiver 3 in between Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs.
Exactly. So, and after that last year with, Kittle being hurt and Pitts obviously being in college, that was pretty much it for the top end tight ends. There was still, the Mark Andrews, the TJ Hawkinsons of the world that were above the wasteland, but not at the elite level of Waller and Kelsey. And it just provides such a competitive advantage when the team you're playing against is rolling out, Jonnu Smith at tight end. That team's just banking on him, scoring a touchdown that week. There's nothing that you're not afraid of that. But if you put out a Waller or a Kelsey and a Terry McLaurin, that is so much better.
But to roll it back, right, to the value of wide receivers, which is what this segment was built on, right? I think when we're comparing wide receivers to wide receivers, apples to apples, there's a lot we can learn. But there is we all had a tough time saying, Tyreek Hill versus Darren Waller, who we have. Keep Trade Cut has it like over basically 1,000-point difference of Tyreek Hill above Darren Waller, right?
Well, I think that the issue with that, obviously we're thinking
they're the same age.
I know, but I'm saying we're thinking in tight end premium leagues. I think I think if we're thinking level playing field here, I think I would lean Tyreek Hill straight up.
But it's close.
It's definitely close. I think 1,000 points is too much.
It's close.
Like you'd have to put on like a late first onto Darren Waller to get you Tyreek Hill. So that's where I'm willing to part with what's considered an elite wide receiver for the likes of an elite tight end if I can do it. But it's got to be someone I'm comfortable about. I don't know if I'm willing to do. I know Travis Kelce. This year he's good. I don't know how many more years he's good. Kind of thing.
It kind of has also been the debate in rookie drafts between Kyle Pitts and Jamar Chase.
Well, I was thinking Pitts because I think Pitts is the better prospect, but
I'm just saying they're both viewed as like tier 1, 1A top of their position group, and both of you, both these guys are going to be studs, kind of equal value. Like in a lot of non-superflex drafts, they go one after the other.
I'm sure if you were looking at them at their rookie year and say they're coming out together and they're ranked together, would you rather have had Julio Jones or Travis Kelce? I'm willing to bet the team that had Travis Kelce won the more championships. I can't guarantee that. I wish I could do stats on that. I'm sure it's probably
in the
out
long
there.
run.
Well,
you had 5 years of the number 1 tight end in the league. Damn.
But you do have to wait a little bit for it too. Typically, Kyle Pitts might be a unicorn in that regard.
In a superflex, not a superflex, in a tight end premium league, I think yes. Travis Kelce. I think the tight ends are underrated. I like tight ends a lot. I'm the tight end guy in our league.
Hold your roll, Frank.
He's got 4 tight ends that are all out of the wasteland. One's borderline wasteland, but.
I don't know.
Dan Arnold's apparently the sleeper of the season right now, right?
He's been the sleeper of the season for 3 years in a row.
Yeah, it's great. Every year without fail.
Dan Arnold or Bryan Edwards? I think that's what he's come across.
He's gone from being the 4th wide receiver or 4th receiving option on the he's probably a 5th on the Cardinals to the 5th or 6th on the Panthers. He didn't move up. He's still there. He's still behind all the top dogs. Sorry,
Yeah.
Dan Arnold.
You know, the other thing too, though, I know that we're about to end the episode and whatnot, but trading for veteran wide receivers at top dollar has not really been a great move.
No.
I think some of the examples
I
right
hate
now
to
would be like Stephon Diggs.
Yeah,
it
you're never gonna win that trade just because like Stephon Diggs right now is valued at dynasty wide receiver, I think like top 5 right now, and obviously he's coming off a great season. He's a very talented wide receiver, tied to Josh Allen.
Wide receiver.
Oh, okay, there you go. It's top 10, and I think that's pretty similar to like DeAndre Hopkins. All these guys are tied to good quarterbacks. Coming off a good season. Very talented wide receivers. We've seen them do it in the NFL. But the price you're going to pay is going to be an upfront cost. If you're a contender, it's worth it because that could push you over the edge to a championship. But if you're a team that's trying to just consistently build, you're never going to win that because by the time your team comes around, he's going to be aging out, and that's just not the way to do it.
Well, it's just like if we look at I'm looking at some 2018 startup rankings, right? Like D-Hop is pick 4. Mike Evans is pick 8. Freaking Devontae Adams is pick 17. Like, those guys are just never going to consistently go up. It's fine if you buy them, especially to hold. Like, if you bought Adam Thielen at this time last year, you're probably having a great time because he was one of those dudes that, he was worth a first, but when are you ever going to get a first for Adam Thielen at the time? And then he puts out a top 12 season. I think that that's the way that you should buy veterans. Like JT said with Odell, or maybe even, I know he's not necessarily like a veteran, but I think with Deebo Samuel, where it's like you can buy a dude at a discount when his talent is clearly at that level of being able to produce. But going out and 2 years ago buying Julio Jones because he was on the trade block for a first-round pick plus has not been a great move. And I think you should be wary of that, where it's like you have to decipher, okay, who are the veteran receivers at a discount? Who are the veteran receivers I have to pay top dollar for? Give me the one at a discount because they have basically just as high of a ceiling and have been – how many times is it that you have a guy that's a veteran receiver somewhere between 27 to 31 years old that completely turns it around and is all of a sudden still a wide receiver 1, like low end or high end wide receiver 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's countless examples every season.